Would the defendant's attorney please give their opening statements?
Thank you, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I would also like to thank you for your service in serving on this jury for this very important case. My name is James Pennington, and I'm the attorney for the defendants in this case, Officer Edward Waldman and the City of Chicago. Now, the plaintiff's attorney gave you a very interesting version of the facts that happened on the morning of December 7th, 1996. I would like to tell you a few things that he didn't tell you. When Mr. Ramirez was at this party with his friends, he took a six-pack of beer and drank the entire six-pack. After he left his house, they decided they would go to a bar and have a couple of drinks of hard liquor. After they were there for a while, they decided to go to another bar and have a couple of drinks. And then finally a third bar to have a couple of drinks before they went into the stadium and played their games. Now, after they left the stadium, as you've already heard, Mr. Ramirez was driving down Evergreen Street between California and Rockwell when he saw the officer's car in front of him. Now, Officers Levy and his partner, Officer Waldman, they were called to investigate a burglary in a neighborhood. They were driving very slow through the community. Now, these two fine officers, they're charged with a duty to prevent crime and to protect citizens, and that's exactly what they were doing in those early morning hours of December 7th. While they were in the performance of their duties, Mr. Ramirez pulled up behind them and was honking his horn constantly for about half a city block. Finally, they pulled over. Mr. Ramirez pulled over alongside them. Mr. Ramirez got out of his vehicle. Officer Levy was driving the car. He noticed Mr. Ramirez, who had been drinking, coming toward him with a knife. Well, his duty is to prevent crime. He immediately exited the vehicle and identified himself as an officer of the law. Mr. Ramirez continued toward him, and they did get into an altercation. They struggled along the unmarked police vehicle when Mr. Ramirez raised the knife and plunged it into Mr. Levy's left shoulder. Officer Waldman got out of the vehicle. He looked over the car, saw what was happening. He saw Mr. Ramirez raise his arm again to strike Mr. Levy. Now, at that moment, an officer has a decision to make. He has a duty to protect the person and life of his partner. He has to decide what his choices are and the ramifications of his actions in a split second. He determined at that moment to protect Officer Levy's life, who Officer Waldman believed had a knife coming close to his jugular, that he had to stop those events. In his professional judgment as an officer of the law, he pulled out his sidearm and shot Mr. Ramirez in the back. We don't dispute that. Now, after Mr. Ramirez fell to the ground after being shot, other officers arrived, and they did find the knife that was used to stab Officer Levy. They placed it into evidence, and it was later used at Mr. Ramirez's trial for battery. Now, you will hear a lot of discussion as to who approached whom first, who struck whom first. But really, all that doesn't matter. What really matters here is whether or not Officer Waldman used reasonable judgment, acted as a reasonable person, a reasonable peace officer, whenever he chose to use deadly force to prevent deadly force, what he believed was deadly force, against his partner, Officer Levy. It is regrettable that Mr. Ramirez sustained these injuries and time off of work. But again, the issue is whether or not Officer Waldman used reasonable judgment in deciding what type of force to use to protect the life and person of Officer Levy. Now, it is true that when Officer Levy was transported to Cook County Hospital, his wound wasn't very severe, and thankfully so, that due to the defensive efforts of Officer Levy and the shot fired by Officer Waldman, that the wound wasn't more severe. It is your job to decide fact from fiction, just as opposing counsel said. You will need to decide which story is more reasonable. Whether a conspiracy exists among practically all of the Chicago Police Department to construe and hide and tell mistruths about facts and evidence, or whether what Officer Waldman did at the time was reasonable. You will hear two officers testify that they saw the knife and the stabbing. You'll hear a third officer testify that he found the evidence at the scene. So you'll need to decide whether it's more reasonable to believe that some overblown conspiracy exists, or that an intoxicated man approached a police officer and another officer came to his aid, as was his duty, and exercised what was regrettable but necessary deadly force. Thank you for your attention.